my name's Laurel Henagan. I'm here with Dr. Dale Lightfoot at OSU Library. This is for the O State Story series. So tell me, when and where were you born?
I was born in Fort Worth, Texas in 1957.
Okay. And what was your early life growing up there?
I wasn't in Fort Worth very long. My dad worked as a corporate pilot at the time, so we moved around quite a bit. Moved to Austin shortly after I was born, and then to Tulsa.
Okay.
And I grew up in Tulsa.
Okay.
So I consider myself an Okie, though I was born in Texas.
Yeah, me too. So what did your parents do for a living?
My father worked for he worked as a corporate pilot for a while, and then most of the time I was growing up, he was working as a safety engineer.
Okay.
Several oil companies, Skelly Oil, and Mobil Oil, and Amerada Hess, a variety of companies. My mother stayed at home.
Okay.
Raised 4 kids.
4 kids.
That's a full-time job.
Yeah, that is. So how many brothers and sisters?
2 older sisters, 1 younger brother.
Okay. So, what activities did you do for fun as a child? Like, what hobbies did you have, or?
The usual kinds of things kids do before we had, 300 channels and video games and all that sort of thing. I outside a lot if the weather was halfway decent, and even when it wasn't, usually outside. If it was a really bad day, we'd stay inside and play board games or something like that, but most of the time it was riding bicycles or exploring in the woods out by my house. Lived way up in northwest Tulsa, right at the edge of city limits, at the edge of Osage County. So had a lot of woods and hills and such. Used to play out there. Pretty big yard. Yeah. Lots of friends in the neighborhood. Yeah. So we were outside playing until it got dark, and sometimes even after when Mom was calling, we were still staying out playing outside. Yeah. So in school, what was your favorite subject? I don't really know that I had a favorite subject. I liked most everything, and I did well in school.
Yeah.
I liked things related. I mean, looking back in hindsight, I liked a lot of the things related to the discipline that I'm in now, though I didn't think of it that way or as a future or anything. Right. But I used to read stories and books relating to sort of the world and people and maps and countries, and I always wanted to travel and had an uncle who traveled all over the world, lived all over the world. I wanted to do that.
Yeah.
But as far as just subjects, there wasn't anything I really didn't like. Some of my favorite subjects were, I guess, more like, history and geography and people and places, things related to that. But anything was interesting to me.
Okay. So, since you lived in Tulsa and you consider yourself an Okie, is that what made you decide to come to OSU, because it was kind of close to home? Or?
Yeah. I had a few friends in high school who were going to Oklahoma State. I wasn't seriously considering going to college when I was, but especially by sophomore, junior year. By senior year, I was thinking about it a little more. Sophomore, junior year, thought maybe it was a possibility, and I did. Again, I was a good student, did well in school, but I went to a high school where not a large percentage of the students went on to college, and I had parents who were encouraging me to go to college, and I was considering it, but I also had a friend who was doing very well as a cabinet maker, furniture maker, and I was working for him part-time, and I took 2 years of vocational cabinet making in high school. Yeah. 1 college prep course. So I was sort of angling that direction, and my mother convinced me to give it a shot. Yeah. And I had several friends who were going to Oklahoma State. I didn't know anybody who was going to OU. So I just kind of gravitated where my friends were going and thought I would give it a shot for a semester and see how it went.
Right. So, what years did you attend OSU initially for your bachelor's? I know you got your bachelor's and your graduate.
Fall of '76 through spring of 1980.
Okay. And what was your major, and how did you choose that? How did you?
I started out as a forestry major because I liked trees and forests and mountains and that sort of thing. It's sort of an idealized version of what forestry is.
Right.
I spent one semester as a forestry major and mostly taking gen ed.
Mm-hmm.
I had one forestry class, intro forestry class, and it was fine. I liked it, but I found something more related to what I had done, or what the sort of the furniture and cabinet making side of things that I was always interested in. I found a major I didn't even know existed called Industrial Arts Education, basically shop teacher.
Okay.
But it's a combination of things like woodworking, cabinet work, machine welding, photography, small engines, basically all the things you could possibly do in a public school as in a shop context. The kinds of things they do at like Meridian vocational technology kind of education. Now, but that back then, a lot of that, though they had the VOTEX, a lot of the programs were also in high schools, including in my high school. We had programs like that in high school, and I had taken a lot of those classes, including small engines and vocational photography and a variety of things like that while I was in high school. So I thought, and I had good teachers teaching those subjects. I liked it. So I thought I could do that kind of thing. It was half the vocational technical education and half of it was education, because it was housed in adult and occupational education, which OSU doesn't have anymore, nor do they have an industrial arts program anymore. But a lot of it was education classes, so I was taking a lot of methods and teaching and that sort of thing too. Okay.
And were you, after you got that degree, were you initially planning to go back, or were you planning to be a shop teacher, or were you planning to?
That was the plan.
Okay.
I liked the subjects a lot. I did very well. And right out of, actually before I finished, I was offered a position at Enid High School. My wife, at the time, I was married a year before I finished college.
Okay.
My wife was finishing up elementary ed, and I was in the industrial arts ed program. We were both offered teaching jobs in the Enid School District. And at the time, we were both talking about it and decided we'd had enough of Oklahoma. We'd lived here all of our life. We wanted to go out and see the world. And so we just loaded up all of our things in a U-Haul trailer and a U-Haul truck and moved up to Colorado and ski bummed for a couple of years.
Wow. That sounds fun.
Yeah, not exactly what your parents want you to do
right
after you get your degree and you have a job in hand. We figured there was time for that later.
Yeah.
We were going to go play for a while.
That's awesome. So tell me about some of the classes you remember taking for your undergrad, like what buildings they were in, or the general learning environment.
The industrial arts classes, most of them, a couple of them, I think there was a welding lab that was somewhere north of campus, one of the outbuildings, Quonset huts, one of those old Quonset huts out there. Most of them were in the industrial education building, which no longer exists. It was an older one-story building that sits where the engineering annex, the annex that sits just to the east of engineering building.
Okay.
It occupied that footprint, or much of that footprint anyway. Okay. That's where a lot of the labs and work facilities were. So that's where a lot of my classes were, at least all of them related to my major. I mean, I took a lot of things outside of the major. It was interesting, many years later, having completed both a master's and a doctoral degree in geography, and then working as a faculty member in a couple of different universities, including here as a geography professor. I was looking back at my transcripts, moving into my house, came across boxes full of papers, and I had noticed that I had filled up all my electives with geography classes. So again, that's things I was interested in even as a kid.
Yeah.
And this subject fascinated me. It was just a kind of an understanding of the world and how the world works and who's in it and what's where and why and all these interconnections. It's not countries and capitals. There's a lot involved in just piecing it all together and making sense of the world. And a lot of interesting tools to try to address those issues and problems. So I was fascinated with the subject. Yeah. And except for the required courses in some other categories, you know, that you're expected to take. Anything that was just a free elective that I could fill with an S or an N or whatever. They were all geography classes.
Wow. I've heard that the Quonset huts didn't have, I know in previous years they didn't have AC or heat. Did they have it by the time you were a student?
I don't even remember.
You don't remember, okay.
I don't remember shivering, and I don't remember being hot, so I guess they did.
Yeah, maybe we just had mild weather that year. So you said you were married, but where did you live before and after that? So you got married while you were a student, right?
I got married just before my senior year.
Okay, so did you live on campus?
No, we lived in, I think it was called Hacienda Apartments, I think was the name of it. It was just it was actually North Perkins somewhere, out in that area.
That was after you got married?
Yeah.
And then before,
I lived in the dorms all the time that I was a student.
What buildings?
My first dorm room was 1002 Kerr Hall.
Okay.
I don't remember the room number or even the floor that I had in Wilham, but after 1 year, I moved to Wilham and stayed there for 2 years.
Okay.
I definitely remember it was Wilham, and it was a north-facing window, but I don't remember what floor. I remember 1002, I guess, because it was my first room.
I lived on the 10th floor of Drummond my freshman year, so I know what that's like.
So the high-rise dorms, basically.
Yeah.
And I was there until I got married and then moved into an apartment.
Okay. So how did you cover tuition, room, and board? Did you have a job when you were a student?
I had a job for spending money and dating money.
Gotcha.
My parents covered my tuition and room and board.
Okay.
And then I was responsible for everything else.
Yeah,
I got no allowance. I covered everything else. I worked at a grocery store not far from where I grew up. Actually, it was a job I had before I came to college.
Okay.
And I would go home on weekends and work there. One winter, I took a leave of absence basically from the grocery store. It was a family-run operation. It was pretty easy to just sort of work as needed. And worked for Brown and Root as an electrician's helper, basically pulling cable up here at the power plant north of town up by Red Rock. I was involved in laying a lot of the cables outside and inside, pulling cables. I remember shivering and cold and chilly for several months on every weekend out there for months and months over the winter.
Not a great break.
It was good money. It was, I think it was something like $5.50 an hour or something, which sounds like nothing now, but it was a lot more than I was making at the grocery store, and it seemed like good money at the time.
Yeah. So what kind of, were you involved in any on-campus organizations or activities as an undergrad? Any clubs or? No.
I had my friends. I had my classes.
Yeah.
I had a steady girlfriend.
So
that's where all of my time went.
Yeah. Do you recall any campus traditions while you were on campus? Like, was there anything that you did that, everybody just had to do while they were a student?
No, like anything that anyone had to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I went to football games.
Yeah.
It's always fun. I went to the Student Union theater shows. Those were fun. Somewhere along the way, there was a Rocky Horror Picture Show. There has to be that, right? And I remember my first couple of dates actually were films in the Student Union theater.
Yeah.
Do they still show films in the Student Union?
I think sometimes. It's not, I don't think it's as often as it used to be years ago.
We used to have pretty regular showings
every once
of
in a while
films
there'll be something.
But then there weren't as many things to do either on or off campus then. I mean, there were activities around campus, speakers and plays and orchestral events and that sort of thing. But there weren't as many other things going on. There weren't, and not as many people had cars. There weren't as many entertainments around Stillwater, than movie theaters or something. What?
Was it a lot smaller town?
Well, I wouldn't say a lot, 35,000 maybe, somewhere in that ballpark.
Okay.
But we didn't have all of the activities, as many activities on campus.
Right.
So, a film night was kind of a big deal. Steak night was kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
We didn't even have all of the convenience stores and the 16 different options for dining in the dorms. This was your dorm cafeteria. You had your punch card. That's where you ate. It was in your dorm cafeteria style.
Yeah.
And that was it. So, when they varied the menu once in a while by adding steak, it was a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
Even though the steak wasn't particularly awesome, it was steak. And it was something different, right?
Right. So, while you were a student, were there any faculty members that you remember or that had an impact on you, or just anybody that you favorited?
No, the two faculty members who were most involved in the industrial arts program obviously had more impact on me. But I can't even recall I can recall the faces, certainly, and the subjects. I can't even recall the names of some of the others. I remember others better when I came back for a master's degree or beyond, but it was just so many years ago. I don't even remember the names of all of them. I remember subjects, I remember faces, but I can't remember the names. But I don't always recall names so well.
Yeah. So you met your wife when you were a student.
I did.
Did you know her before, or you just met her?
No, I met her after an interesting evening with friends when they were drinking, and I wasn't, and they came back to Wilhelm. I wasn't living there at the time. I was living in Kerr. Mm-hmm. But one of my friends, they were all high school friends, went out for pizza, and they were drinking beer, and they came back that was back when you could drink at 18.
Right.
It was legal.
Yeah.
And they were in a good mood, and we went back to my friend's dorm room in Wilhelm, one of the dorm rooms that faced north toward Wilhelm North. This is Wilhelm South, facing the girls' side, Wilhelm North. And someone at some point, while they were just acting goofy, took out a pair of binoculars and started looking at the girls on the other side. It went both ways, by the way. The girls did the same thing looking at the guy. And we noticed there were some girls in a dorm room, 3 of them. And one of my friends told me, if you take a flashlight and write the number backwards in the window, 1 number at a time, sometimes they'll call you. I thought, okay, whatever. And everyone else was game, and I was just kind of going along with it.
Yeah.
But I took the flashlight, and I wrote his phone number as he called out the number to me, and I wrote the number in the window, 1 number at a time. And the girls on the other side, we've gotten their attention, so they were sort of waving, and when they did the thumbs up and okay, got it, the phone rang. And started a phone conversation. And one of the girls talked to one of my friends, and another girl talked to one of my friends, and another girl talked to one of my, it was just like that for a while. And while they were talking, some other girl walked into the dorm room. And I remember one of my friends who was looking at the binoculars at the time said, she looks pretty nice. Who is that? And we're asking to talk to her, and she wasn't interested in talking to any of these creepy guys who were calling on the phone.
Right.
She just walked into the room to meet some of her friends on the floor. And when they were all done, and the girls were done talking to all of my friends, and my friends had had enough, I asked if I could talk to that other girl, and she eventually got on the phone and had a brief conversation with me, part of which was me trying to convince her I'm not one of the creepy guys, or just trying to look at the girls through the binoculars all the time, that I was just kind of party to the action.
Yeah.
It wasn't my idea necessarily. And she at least got her phone number, and she agreed to talk to me the next night if I would call.
Yeah.
And I did. And then another night, and then another night. We had long phone conversations. And then finally agreed to a date. After swapping pictures, because she wanted to see what I looked like first.
Up close.
So we did that, swapping pictures by dropping off a picture in a mailbox, basically.
Yeah.
And by that point, she decided I was okay.
Yeah.
And we agreed to a date. It was Red River, I think, an old Western movie showing in the Studio Union Theater. And we went out by Theta Pond and sat on a bench and talked for a long time. That was date number 1. Wow. And we're still married.
Oh, that's awesome. So how many years?
Married in 1979.
Okay.
So you do the math.
Well, I'm not a math major. So.
34? 80,
Yeah.
99, 09, 10, no, 37?
37?
37.
Wow. So you said you worked at home on the weekends. Did your parents ever come and visit you while you were in school, or because you lived close?
Yeah, they came to visit every once in a while, but because I was home on average every other weekend, sometimes 2 or 3 weekends in a row, as the grocery store needed me and as I needed cash, I was home frequently enough to do laundry, visit, say hi, catch up on the news, that sort of thing. But they would come up every once in a while.
Yeah. And do you remember homecoming? Was it as big of a deal?
Not anywhere near like it is now. Yeah. I mean, there was a homecoming, but there was nothing like the huge walk around.
Right.
There was no tailgating before games, and if there was, it certainly wasn't very noticeable. Individuals, perhaps, but I have no memory of any tailgating events.
So, after you graduated, you and your wife moved to Colorado. So, what made you decide to come back to OSU and enroll as a graduate student?
Well, after spending a couple of years ski bumming, which is great and fun, and a really good opportunity to get really good at skiing, but poor all the time, making no money, just barely enough to cover rent and groceries. I went in the Navy for a while and started what I thought was going to be a career, and sort of decided I didn't want to do it full time and transferred to reserves instead. And started looking around at what I wanted to do in the next chapter. Right, we both decided it was time to get serious about life. We were a little older by then and had played for a while and tried out a couple of things, and it was time to get a graduate degree. At the time, my wife's brother had recently gotten a degree in computer science, and he was doing really well in that career field. This was 1980, and even just general computer science actually was a pretty good skill set. So, and my wife and I both took a computer programming course at Colorado Mountain College while we were living there in Colorado, and decided we might try the same thing. So we started looking around at grad schools and were accepted as special students, which basically means you're not enrolled in a degrees program yet, but you intend to, and you're just going to take classes for a semester or two. We enrolled as special students. We both took a computer programming course and a couple of other things as well, sort of angling in that direction. And we applied at CU Boulder because we were there in Colorado. We applied at OSU because we had our degrees there and we had the family support network back here. And when we were accepted here, we decided we've been away long enough, let's move back, see the family again, and go to a place that's familiar. And so we came back to OSU to start our master's degrees.
And what year was that?
1983.
1983.
Yeah, 1983.
And so, so you and your wife both got graduate degrees?
We did.
Okay.
Both picked up our undergraduate degrees here, and a few years later picked up master's degrees here. I came back, again, I was going to do computer science. She was kind of angling that direction as well. But after the first semester, she had applied for and was accepted in the Master's of Business Administration program, MBA program. So she spent the next 2.5, roughly, doing an MBA degree. And I don't even remember the occasion, but I remember having a conversation with someone about how I wanted to do computer science, but I was also interested in all these things related to the landscape and places, sort of geography kinds of things, and had taken a lot of those courses. And somebody mentioned, well, why don't you go talk to someone in the geography department? They do computers, they do things with computers too, because at that time remote sensing was really kind of a hot topic, a really growing tool set within geography for imaging the earth and doing a lot of analysis of land cover and land change and that sort of thing. The early days of that, really. GIS, Geographic Information Systems, weren't around other than things that individuals had written, some computer programs. So I remember talking to the department head at the time, Dick Heacock, and he told me what geography is and what geographers do and what I could do with aerial photographic work, aerial mensuration, digital satellite imagery. They had a faculty member who was doing a lot of that kind of work. Might I be interested in that? It's like, well, I could do, it's more like applied computer work in a field that I was really interested in a lot, obviously, because I'd already had a lot of courses in that. So it was just, the light bulb went on. Ding, perfect marriage of a lot of different interests.
Yeah.
So instead of just a generic computer programming degree, I transferred to geography after the first semester and loved it.
And then after, so did it take you 2.5 years or long? Long did
I finished my degree in 4 semesters after I started. Again, we were both spent one semester as a special student. I spent the next 4 semesters completing a degree. My wife needed 1 more semester after I was done to complete. So at that point, I had already applied for doctoral programs and had been accepted at a couple of them. Actually, 4 of the 5 I applied to, I was accepted. 2 of them I had good assistantship offers. I had accepted the assistantship at University of Colorado Boulder and knew I was heading that direction. So I spent my last semester taking courses that could be credited to my doctoral program. I was sort of the early stages of doing language training, Spanish. So I took additional Spanish courses at the time, which I needed for my PhD degree. And just some other courses that were relevant to what I would be doing there. And I transferred those credits into my degree program at CU Boulder. So I wasn't just marking time, I was actually working toward the next degree in that last semester while my wife was finishing her MBA.
Okay. And what, for your geography graduate degree, what was the coursework like? What was required of you?
Well, just like today, because I had come in from a non-geography background, I was required to take some prerequisite courses, sort of an undergrad degree light, if you will. An upper division physical geography course, an upper division human geography course, statistics, cartography, which was then manual cartography. Now it's all digital. But some basic tools and skills and a couple of courses just to introduce me at the upper division level to the physical and human sides of this discipline. We do the same with students today. And I was taking those while also taking remote sensing, my quantitative methods course, a variety of things that were part of my master's degree program. I was doing the prerequisite work at the same time.
Okay.
And I was wanting to specialize in remote sensing, so I was taking everything that the department had related to introductory remote sensing and image processing, and got a research assistantship working for Dr. Steve Walsh, who was our principal remote sensing specialist at the time, and working over in Thatcher Hall, where he had his Center for Applications for Remote Sensing, which still exists. They don't just do remote sensing, it's remote sensing, GIS, GPS, the whole suite of geospatial information science applied work, research projects. But at the time it was remote sensing, and it was housed in Thatcher Hall with a mainframe computer and all of that. So I was doing research work as a research assistant and taking anything I could get my hands on related to remote sensing or aerial photo mensuration or anything like that in geography and other departments as well. I remember taking a photo mensuration course or something, I think it was in photography and forestry. And then all of the just general required subjects like history and philosophy of geography and research methods and a variety of things like that.
So you went to CU Boulder for your doctorate, so y'all moved back and...
Went back to Colorado again. One of the 2 places I'd applied to for my master's program, so I eventually did go to CU Boulder. It was one of 5 places I applied to for a doctoral degree, and it was my top choice. It's where I most wanted to go. I remember I received an assistantship offer I was accepted initially and then received an offer as an assistantship at the University of Oregon in Eugene, which was also high on my list, just based on sort of location as well as the professors there, the subject matter that I could specialize in. And I was right on the cusp of accepting that assistantship offer when the University of Colorado called me, which was great because they were my top choice. So I got exactly what I wanted and had an assistantship and a great education there, and good times, good place to go to school.
How long were y'all there?
4 years.
4 years.
I finished my degree in 4 years, start to finish.
And then where did you go from there?
My first faculty position was at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia. We lived in Virginia Beach. I worked in Norfolk. And I was there in Virginia Beach for 4 years.
And you came back to OSU, or?
I did. I came back here, though that wasn't the intention originally. It's not like I was opposed, but not long after we arrived in Virginia, we started a family. By design, about finished with my degree. My wife was going back to school anymore. Time to start a family. We were getting a little older, early 30s at that point. And my son came along within the first year that we were living in Virginia. And so a friend in the department here, Steve Tweedy, faculty member, actually by then one of only maybe 4 faculty members who I had known as a student who were still at OSU. He contacted me and asked if I'd be interested in swapping positions with him for a semester. Apparently he had talked to his administrators about this and said that it was possible. He knew that I had started a family and was spending every Christmas break and, a couple of weeks every summer coming back to Oklahoma visiting the family. And he had, at that point, both of his children were out on the East Coast. One was, I think, going to Yale University, and one was living in the Outer Banks in North Carolina, not far from where I was living in Virginia Beach. So he asked if I might be interested in swapping houses and offices and teaching position, etc. And I talked to my department head and, ran it up the administrative chain, and they approved here as well. So in the spring of '94, I moved into his house for a semester and worked out of his office and taught his classes. And he did the same there, just lived in my townhouse there and taught my classes and worked out of my office. It was supposed to just be a 1-semester swap, just so I could spend a little time closer to my family and he could spend a little time closer to his family and, something different, change of scenery. And while I was here, John Rooney, one of the faculty members in the department, retired, and they opened his position and advertised it, and I threw my hat in the ring, and I ended up getting the position. So I called my department head in Virginia Beach and basically said, I'll come back just long enough to get my things and leave, but sorry, I must go. It was too good of an offer to pass up. It was a great department, a much larger geography program than I was in there. I was in a combined political science and geography department there. Campus I was familiar with. I liked the environment. We had, again, young son at the time. Family was close by in Tulsa. It was a really nice setup. So I had already been applying at other universities somewhere in this general area, kind of Colorado, New Mexico, Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma, just somewhere back in this general region. The job just happened to open up where I was temporarily teaching, and a really ideal setup in a university I was already comfortable with, where I already knew the people and I already liked the football and basketball teams. So perfect fit.
So because you were both an undergraduate, graduate, and now a professor here, you probably have a very unique perspective on how the student body has changed over time. So what are some of the differences that you notice just in general of students now versus when you were a student?
I don't think they're really any different in terms of their preparation or abilities. And then, as well as now, you have students who are really dedicated and do well in school and are involved in life at the university and good with their classes, and others who seem on the fringe and just sort of drifting in and out. You had the same then as now. Students are students. Obviously, just, technology is different. Their ADD focus on their smartphones as they're walking across campus is certainly different. Their seeming inability to do without said gadgets in the classroom is certainly different.
Yeah.
Then I suppose we had our own distractions if we were, not so much engaged in the subject matter, but there wasn't much to do but pay attention if you were in class. There weren't so many other distractions. But I don't see a huge difference between students then as now, other than they seem to look younger and younger every year. I didn't know I was that young then.
Right. So, you're the department head for geography.
Mm-hmm.
And
have been for 17 years now.
And do you still actively teach and involved or
Yes.
work with graduate students?
Mm-hmm. As department head, I am 50% administration. At least that's how it is on paper. In reality, it's more like 80% administration. But because I'm half-time administration, that means I go to a half-time teaching load. And our usual teaching load is 2 and 2.
Okay.
Two classes per semester, so I teach 1 and 1.
Yeah.
One class each semester.
Upper division or?
Upper division and a graduate seminar.
Mm-hmm.
For several years it's been upper division course in the fall and a graduate seminar in the spring. I just recently decided to move out of the graduate seminar, which I taught for many, many years, just change of pace, and go back to an intro level classroom in the spring. We need to get more regular faculty members in the intro level classes, and we've done that with several of our other faculty members, and I'm going to do the same. So I surrendered a graduate seminar to go back to teaching world regional geography intro class in the spring.
So, since you've left and returned to Stillwater so much, how have you seen the town of Stillwater change?
Every time I came back, it looked like it was different. It still felt familiar in some ways, but there was always something different. Of course, it doesn't take very long before that feels familiar to you as well, but every trip back, there were new restaurants, new stores, the campus had changed, new buildings. Nothing like we've seen in the last 10, 15 years or so. I mean, a building had come down, a new one went up, but the last a decade and a half especially, pretty phenomenal changes on campus. But it's still, the core of the campus was the same.
Yeah.
The pace of life was the same friendly atmosphere and comfortable connections were there. It was real easy to settle right back in and feel at home again every time I came back.
Yeah. So about the field of geography, obviously, you specialized in computers in the 80s, so I'm sure the field has seen a lot of changes over time.
Oh, it feels a tremendous change, yeah.
So
that was just sort of the early stages of computer and computing power, sort of revamping the skills that geographers used, the skill set, the tools, basically, the toolkit that geographers use to address world problems.
Yeah. So was it, since you've seen firsthand, as a young student to now, has it been, I guess, exciting seeing the technological developments?
Yeah, I mean, generally it's pretty exciting because we still do everything that we had done before, and some of the questions we're asking are similar, and the subject matter we're dealing with is similar. But the tools we have at our disposal are much more varied than we used to have. There's still, cartographic work, field work, oral histories or interviews, field survey, mapping, a variety of different tools that we had in the past that are both easier to acquire as well as can be added to completely new tools that we didn't even have available before. Particularly the computing power of geographic information systems, overlaying information digitally rather than manually overlaying information on Mylar sheets where you're trying to get a sense of, what affects what, which affects what, laid on top of one another. You can do this all digitally, and the computational power of doing that digitally is tremendously enhanced what geographers can do and the kinds of data that can be produced. But, and GPS, which has certainly aided the mapping sciences as well as fed into GPS and GIS and remote sensing. And then newer tools like unmanned aerial systems, UAS or UAVs or drones, if you will. We have those as well, quadcopters, fixed wing UAS platform for traditional imaging, like panchromatic imaging as well as multispectral imaging to emulate what satellite imagery does, but much finer resolution and on demand, right, through a UAS that we control. So there are growing number of tools available to address problems, but the kinds of questions that are being asked aren't so different than they were in the past. We just have different perspectives and unique tools to solve them, that's all.
Yeah. And how much research do you still do, and how involved are you in?
Not as much as I would like, but again, as I said before, 50% administration, that's realistically more like 80%. Yes, I've always remained active in research. I wouldn't want to be a department head and just a department head. In fact, that's not the most fun part about this job. The most exciting and interesting parts of the job are the research and the teaching, and they feed into one another. Things that I learn in the field, I can also bring back into the classroom, or they just keep me interested in the subject, because we can always change and morph into new topics and new themes of research as we get interested in other subject areas. So the teaching the subjects that I like, which also happen to kind of feed into the research that I do, and then going into the field for 2, 3, sometimes 4 months at a time to do the field work. All of my field work is muddy boots geography, basically out in the field and always overseas somewhere, North Africa, Middle East, Central Asia primarily. It's also an excuse to see the world, learn a lot of new things, have some cool adventures, have something good to write about, contribute to the discipline and related disciplines. Geographers are very interdisciplinary, and so we borrow from and we contribute to a lot of different disciplines. Myself, I've published in anthropological and archaeological journals, agricultural sciences, variety of things like that, because they're all related to the kinds of things I do that involve land use and water and people and people's use of water and history of technology and a variety of things like that. So they're cognate disciplines that I contribute to as well. And that research really keeps my perspective on things and my career fresh. And sharing all of this, as well as just general interests, even at the introductory level in the classroom, helps to keep it all fresh for me as well, and really helps me to tolerate the administrative grind of it all. That's really the most fun part of the job.
Yeah. So, what's one of your favorite places that you've been to traveling for your research?
Favorite, probably, I would say, well, I don't know, it depends on most adventurous or most relaxing and enjoyable. Most adventurous. Well, my favorite place overall, I would say, is Morocco, because that's the first place that I had a funded research project overseas. I had worked prior to that time in New Mexico, just south of Santa Fe. That's where I did my dissertation fieldwork. Had a couple of summers living out of a tent on a friend's property south of Santa Fe. Great place to do fieldwork, by the way. Evenings are in Santa Fe and days are traipsing all over the landscape in a really nice environment. And I'd worked out around Chimney Rock in southwestern Colorado on an archaeological project there. But Morocco was the first time I'd worked overseas, and I was hooked into that project because of the remote sensing, landscape analysis, sort of environmental history work that I had done in those previous projects in New Mexico and Colorado. And I was working for a research team that had recently acquired some imagery, both thermal digital imagery and black and white aerial photographs, and frankly didn't know what to do with them, had some generic idea of how they might employ them, but didn't know how to. So I wrote a proposal and told them what I could do to contribute to their project, basically the environmental history of the oasis surrounding the archaeological site that they were working on. And they liked it. And I went to Morocco and spent 3 months working on a project in a fabulous environment out in southeastern Morocco, out in the oasis in the Sahara. Had a great adventure and learned so much and loved doing that kind of work there, even more than where I had worked in the U.S. I just fell in love with the foreign field work and getting to know other people, and steep learning curve, but so much to learn and so exciting. And parlayed that research project into another one in Syria, and then another one in Jordan, and just another one in Yemen, and just kind of kept going. And pretty soon I was working entirely in North Africa, Middle East, and for funding, that was where I had made my mark, so it was easier to get more grants there rather than in Latin America or the U.S., where I had envisioned working, which is why I was taking Spanish before. I was going to be a Latin Americanist geographer, but just fell in love with that part of the world and the people and the experiences. Just kept writing proposals and was successful enough to go back every second, third year. I'd be successful with another proposal, and my wife would quit whatever job she had at the time, and we'd pack up and move and live in Jordan and Syria for a summer, or in Yemen for a summer, or go to Uzbekistan for a while.
But after you had kids or before?
Because my son was around before I even came back here.
So you'd take him with you?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
He grew up spending summers, and there was one summer in Jordan, another in Syria, and another in Yemen, and another in Morocco, and we spent some time in Uzbekistan. It'd be 3 to 4 months at a time, living in places like that. He'd make friends with whatever local kids were available, and we'd have a fun time, and then come home and return to normal life in whatever house or apartment that we had here at the time.
So, is he your only child?
Yes.
Does he go to OSU, or?
He does.
He does, awesome.
Yeah. He is, now he is about a year before finishing a double degree in finance and accounting.
Keeping the legacy going.
Yes, he's now I guess a third generation OSU student.
Okay.
Because my wife's parents went to OSU.
Okay.
I was a first timer and following my friends from high school here, but my wife's parents went to OSU. Her older brother got his degree at OSU. She has 2 degrees from OSU, and my son is now soon going to pick up his degrees from OSU.
So deeply ingrained, and
It's not that he had to go to Oklahoma State. He could go wherever he wanted. Or as we put it to him, he could go to any state school in the state of Oklahoma.
Right.
And please choose wisely.
So, is there... It seems many OSU students and alumni are very loyal, and obviously your family is very ingrained in OSU culture. So, what is it about Oklahoma State that sparks so much loyalty, do you think?
Well, I mean, I've gone to a couple of other universities. One as a student, University of Colorado Boulder. I taught for a semester as a temporary faculty member at University of Colorado Denver, and had for 4 years. I was at Old Dominion University. I liked all of those places very much. They were great places to be, and had friends there, but they never felt quite like the family that I've sensed here. And I know people from Oklahoma State talk about that all the time as something unique, but maybe that's all they know. Maybe they've only been to Oklahoma State, and they do feel it, where their friends are also part of their family, and even the people who aren't their friends that are part of the broader Oklahoma State University group of faculty and staff and students are all part of, the Cowboy Way and the Cowboy family and all of that. Maybe not everyone takes part in that or feels connected in that way, but most do. And there is something palpable and real there. And it feels comfortable. Maybe that's because that's where I got my undergrad degree and where I made my first friends outside of, the home environment, the high school environment where I started growing as an adult. That was my friend network. But when I came back here, I didn't know anyone, except my wife, who was also here. But made fast friends who also were part of a friendly, cordial environment. And the faculty are all friendly and open and available, and I suppose you'll find that other places as well, but it certainly exists here, and it's a good environment to be in. It's a real healthy environment to be in as a student, as well as a great town to raise a family.
Yeah. So is there anything you'd like to add about your life or your OSU experiences that we haven't covered?